Well, the topic of lying is a fairly big topic. It's said by various psychologists that the human race developed language so that it could lie more effectively. Sort of sounds right, doesn't it? We develop a complex set of concepts and ideas that allow us to lie to each other more efficiently. The lie is actually endemic. It manifests all the way through nature. Animals effectively lie to each other. I have two dogs. One of them will pretend to play, get the other one engaged, and then go and steal its food. It's quite funny to watch, but it's actually just a manifestation of the cheating, lying nature of nature. So this whole thing of lying, I think Jesus said that the prince of this world is a liar from the start, or something like that. Well, what is the prince of this world? Well, I think the Gnostic Christians particularly might have a few things to say about that. But even if you don't want to go into that, you have to admit that the lie is the stuff of life. And in fact, it's very easy to know the truth, because everything is a lie. So all you have to do is invert what you're being told or what you've seen or the impressions that you're being given, and hey presto, you know what the truth is. So nature itself provides us with lots and lots of eye candy. Yeah, it's nice. Got some beautiful flowers outside my window. Very, very nice. But actually, if you invert that, what's going on? Well, basically it's a load of creatures all competing with each other, eating each other, competing for space, particularly plants, and lying to each other to effectively trap each other. You know, it's endless. So I want to look at three or four levels of lying. I want to look at lying as it manifests in society and religions and commerce. Then looking at lying as it might manifest in what you might call more intimate relationships with other people. And then lying, and this is the most important form really, lying to oneself. So let's talk about the commercial world. Now, you will almost certainly understand that marketing is the art of lying. So when you get marketing people together, what they are most interested in is understanding your psychology and then bending the message to your psychology, regardless of what the product is. So a very, very funny article recently about the private spaces in London. Well, they were public spaces. They're now becoming private spaces, and there's a bit of a hoo-ha about it. But basically there's a company called More London. It's a security firm that is now developing these private spaces where basically you have to either pay or you have to belong to some kind of residential area or something. So people can no longer just wander into these spaces. You know, they're parks and squares and so on. And they've called this security company that keeps people out of these spaces More London. It's just, yeah, I'm so grateful to these people. It's such a good laugh. But anyway, the commercial world is basically built on lies. And there's a discipline known as game theory, which applies not just to the world of commerce actually, but to military activities and to business activities. Game theory essentially assumes that people are going to lie to each other. Game theory is a fascinating topic actually. It assumes that people are going to lie, and then it works out the best strategies that each participant in a particular situation can take to optimize their position, assuming that everybody else and that they are lying. There's a whole pile of ideas like private information. So when somebody's selling you a second-hand car, for example, they probably know that the engine's about to drop out or the wheels are about to drop off or something. But you don't know that. They have private information. They can lie to you. And hey presto, they do. And so the world is set up so that all these individual creatures, all these, well, typically human beings, have private information that they can use to basically hoodwink each other, and hoodwink each other they do. It's just the nature of the game. So, in a commercial setting, we see businesses lying to customers. So, just another example. In the UK particularly, the broadband companies, the internet service providers, advertise up to 60 megabits per second, and then you speak to a whole load of people that are using it and they're getting 2 or 3. And the lying goes on endlessly, and people are suckered by it all the time. I mean, it's hard to deal with constant lies, but as I say, we really do know what the truth is. We just take what somebody says and invert it. So when they say up to 60 megabits per second, what we think in our mind is as low as 0 megabits per second, and then you're nearer to the truth. Governments lie to people all the time. People think that governments are there to serve the public. They're not. They're there to serve government officials. And so, for example, again in the UK, just because I happen to know about the UK, the government is slyly, slowly, surely selling off the National Health Service. But in its proclamations, it says, we will safeguard and protect the National Health Service. So the lies are endless, and as you may or may not be aware, depending on where you live, when people in England decided to leave the European Union, they were promised that the £350 million a month, I think it was, that goes to the European Union would be used for the NHS. I think it's either per month or per week. Of course, it was a total lie. When Britain leaves the European Union, none of that money is going into the National Health Service. So, the lies from governments. And the same happens in the United States and Russia and wherever. Governments are lying machines looking after the interests of the people that are in the government and their buddies. And then we get to religions, and religions are full of lies. Religions tend to work on the basis of rewards and punishments. So the idea is that if you follow a certain code, and the code usually involves paying money to and supporting a particular hierarchy, priests and bishops and whoever else. If you support them and do good work, and you're humble, in other words, you don't challenge them and so on, you'll be rewarded. But if you don't do those things, then you will be punished in hell by the devil forever. And then we come to intimate relationships. It's a fact that it depends which country you're in, but for a rough estimate, 40% of people who are married will cheat on their partners. It's lying. There are very well understood reasons why people do this. Men do it because both men and women are obviously driven by the sexual drive. Men do it because the natural instinct in a man is to distribute his sperm as widely as possible. And so when a man's in a marriage and he's with one woman, then there's a very, very strong urge to go and have sex with other women. And for women, the urge is different. It basically boils down to wanting the best possible sperm. And if she sees a guy who looks like a bit of a stud, then maybe she'll be a bit tempted to get his more potent sperm. I know it all sounds very sort of mechanistic and biological, but that's the way it is. We hang romance around all that stuff. Romance is a big lie. There was no romance until about 200 years ago. And now we have romance which we stick on top of what is basically sex, and people have all kinds of expectations that are lies, that I will be true to you for the rest of my life, and sometimes people are, but actually not all that often. And friends, friends very often are mere conveniences. Sometimes they're not. In fact, there's one saying, I can't remember where it comes from, but if in your life you've had one true friend, then you are blessed, and that is rare. So you measure yourself against that one. But let's talk about the most important of these ways in which we lie. Then we lie to ourselves. And in the wonderful book, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, Thomas Ligotti asks a basic question. Is life okay? Now, if you say to somebody, are you okay? They're going to say yes. It's not socially acceptable to say no, except under dire circumstances. But that person that says yes may have just learned they've got cancer, may have just gone through a horrendous divorce, may have lost a child, any number of horrific things that can happen to people, and yet they'll still say yes. And in their mind, most people not only lie to external agents, other people, but they will lie to themselves, and they will say, well, despite the fact that I'm going to be like a hamster in a wheel for the next 40 years, and despite the fact that a decade or two after that I'm going to die of some horrible disease, and despite the fact that all the people that I love, or many of them, will die around me, and despite the fact that, it goes on, a third of the world is starving or hungry right now, and despite the fact, yada yada yada, life's okay. So that's a basic lie. To say that life is not okay to yourself is sort of like it's like a volcanic eruption, and very, very few people would ever admit to themselves that that is the case, because there's too much at stake. They've invested so much in convincing themselves that life is okay, that to say it's not okay is basically to negate everything they've invested in. But actually, to say life is not okay is the start of a new life, oddly enough. But that's not the topic of this podcast, so I'll move on. So you find people pretending to be happy when they're sad. And I'm not talking about people actually pretending to the outside world. I'm talking about them pretending to themselves. People are so out of touch with their emotions. They do not know when they are sad and unhappy, and they pretend to be happy. I once heard again, I don't remember the name, but some woman talking about a walk down Wall Street or somewhere in New York, and she said her heart was broken because she looked at all the faces of the people, all pretending to be happy and enthused, and behind that you could see fairly transparently that they were all, or nearly all, desperately unhappy and desperate to get out. And that lie that one tells to oneself is cause a great deal of pain. Better just to admit that your lot is fucking awful, rather than just pretend that it's okay. At least if you admit what is wrong and what is causing you unhappiness, then you might be able to do something about it, which usually takes courage, maybe some kind of life change, but at least you can do something. And you find people pretending to consent to group behavior, for example, when they abhor it. You see it all the time. People from peer group pressure being persuaded effectively that they are going to enjoy some social occasion, and they pretend that they're enjoying it. It's well known that half the population of the world consists of introverts. These people don't like pissing about, in bars and all the rest of it. They're quite happy at home with a book or something. I know that people who are at home just happy with their own company, or maybe the company of, just the odd person, and maybe reading a book or whatever they want to do, are not consumers. And so, being an introvert is not a very attractive proposition from the point of view of the world of business and commerce. And hence, being an introvert is frowned upon somewhat. But actually, half the world are fucking introverts. They like their own company. But you'll find people cajoled into social activity that actually they don't want to engage in. But they convince themselves that they should do it because that's normal and they will enjoy it. And the fact that they don't is sort of besides the point. And finally we get to people pretending that buying stuff or romantic materialism, which I'll explain in a moment, is making them happy. It's the nature of stuff and romantic materialism that it's basically like a shot of heroin. It'll make you feel okay for maybe a day or two, or maybe a week, and then you need to go and get another shot. Romantic materialism is a term used by Harari in his book Sapiens, which is an excellent book, and he uses it to describe the contemporary fascination for going to places that are typically a bit unusual and exciting, and that going to these unusual exciting places will satisfy. Of course it doesn't. People go somewhere, it's a shithole. The lies have been piled upon them. The pictures in the colour brochures showing beautiful palm trees and golden beaches and beautiful women on the beach and hunky men and so on, and they get there and it's full of fat slobs from Northern Europe, and the golden beach has got oil stains on it, and there are high-rise hotels just behind the beach, and the palm trees have got a disease. Romantic materialism, those websites and colour brochures sell people this dream that if they go to this place they will be happier, and of course they're not, because it's some shithole that's been promoted way beyond its actual value, typically anyway. So, as I'm sure you understand, the lie is the stock and trade of human activity, both in society, in religion, in commercial activities, in fairly personal relationships, and worst of all, lies to oneself. You could spend a long time talking about how people lie to themselves, but I think I've said enough. So remember, you will always know the truth, because everything is a lie. Just invert what you're being told. When you see that colour brochure promoting some paradise that you are desperate to go and stay at for a week or two, when you see that brochure, just remember that the place is a shithole.